The lamp was still burning when he asked me. Our first night as husband and wife, in a house that smelled of new pine and cold wood smoke, my trunk sat by the bed with the lid still shut. On top of it lay a small stitched marker my sister and I had made as girls. He did not ask if I was tired. He did not ask if I was afraid. He sat on the edge of the bed, folded his hands, and asked me one quiet question, the kind a man asks about weather or seed. And in that single sentence, I finally understood why my sister had left in the dark. My name is Miriam, and I grew up in a farming district where a woman's worth was measured by how quietly she carried things. I tell these stories now because so many of them were never allowed to be spoken aloud, and I think they deserve air. If stories about the hidden corners of closed communities matter to you, it would mean a great deal if you subscribed and stayed with me through this one, because this is a story I carried for a long time before I understood it. Before I go on, let me ask you something simple. Has anyone ever asked you a question that told you exactly who they thought you were? I was the second daughter, and everyone in our family agreed I was the easier one. My older sister, Anna, argued. She asked why. She looked people in the eye a beat too long, and she remembered things she was supposed to forget. I did none of that. I folded laundry the way our mother folded it. I said yes before I finished hearing the question. When people praised me at church, they praised me by comparison, and I learned to take that as love. Being easy felt like a kind of safety. It took me years to understand that being easy had also made me useful in a way I never agreed to. Anna left in the spring and no one explained it. One morning her bed was made too neatly, her Sunday dress gone from the hook, and our father's face closed like a barn door before a storm. My mother said Anna had gone to help an aunt 3 districts away, then she said Anna was confused, then she stopped saying anything at all. The word we did not use was the loudest thing in the house. I wrote Anna 2 letters that summer and got nothing back, and I told myself she was busy, that she was ashamed, that she had abandoned us. I did not once consider that my letters might never have reached her. By autumn, there was a man. His name was Daniel, and he was the man Anna had been courting before she left. My father spoke of him warmly, the way you speak of someone whose good opinion you need. Daniel had land, a steady reputation, and a way of standing still in a room that made other people move around him. My mother said it would heal things. She said a good marriage in our family would quiet the talk, would show the district that we were still whole. She never once said the word Anna. She only said that I could put everything right, and I wanted so badly to be the daughter who put things right. So I let myself be courted by the man my sister had run from. I know how that sounds now, but you have to understand what I could see and what I could not. I could see my mother thinner every month, worn down by the whispering. I could see my father's shame sitting at the supper table like an unwelcome guest. I could not see why Anna had gone, because everyone I trusted had agreed to keep it from me. When Daniel asked to marry me, it was framed as a gift I was giving my family. Refusing did not feel like a choice. It felt like cruelty. We married in November in a service that felt more like a settlement than a celebration. I remember the cold floor of the church, the rows of familiar faces, the way the older women nodded at me with something I mistook for approval. I remember my mother crying and thinking those were tears of relief. Only later did I understand that a person can cry from relief and from fear at the same moment, and that my mother had learned long ago to hide the second inside the first. I said my vows in a clear voice. Everyone said I did beautifully. Being beautiful at obeying was the only skill I had. That night, we went to the house Daniel had prepared, a small, clean house at the edge of his father's land. I carried in my trunk myself. On the lid, I had placed the stitched marker, the one Anna and I made as girls, a square of cloth with our initials worked into the corner and a crooked border we had fought over. It was the only thing of hers I still had, and I had brought it without quite knowing why. It sat there in the lamplight, small and worn, while my new husband settled himself on the edge of the bed. I thought he might say something kind. Instead, he looked at the marker for a long moment, then at me, and asked his question. I will not tell you the words yet, because the words alone would not carry what they meant. I need you to feel the house first, the way I felt it, the new pine, the cold at the windows, the trunk I had not yet opened, the whole weight of a family's hope resting on whether I would answer the way I was supposed to. What I can tell you is that the moment he spoke, my sister's silence rearranged itself in my mind. Every unanswered letter suddenly had a shape. Because his question was not about me at all. It was about what I would agree to become. And in it, I heard, plain as a bell across a still field, the exact thing Anna must have heard. Before she packed her Sunday dress and walked out into the dark, I sat very still. The marker lay between us on the trunk like a small witness. I understood all at once that I had not married a stranger who might learn to love me. I had married a man who already knew precisely what he needed from a wife, and who had simply been waiting for a more agreeable sister to ask, "Let me tell you what our life looked like from the outside," because the outside is what everyone believed. Daniel was well regarded. He paid his debts early, kept a clean barn, and sat near the front at Sunday service with the settled ease of a man no one worried about. When we walked into a gathering together, people made room. The older men shook his hand, and the older women touched my arm and said I had married steady, and steady was the highest word they had. I learned quickly that our marriage was a public thing, a picture the whole district looked at and felt reassured by. My job, though no one said it plainly, was to keep the picture still. Inside the house, the rules were different, and they were never written down. In our district, a wife was expected to defer to her husband, and I had grown up knowing that. But most homes I had seen carried it loosely, the way you carry a coat you can set down. In Daniel's house, it was carried like a fence line, fixed, surveyed, and defended. A wife did not simply obey. She was expected to agree out loud, to say the words back, so there could be no confusion later about what she had accepted. I did not yet know this was particular to his family. I thought it was simply what marriage was, and that I had been slow to understand it. I want to be careful here, because it would be easy to say, this is how those people live, and that would be a lie. It is not. Most homes in our district were nothing like Daniel's. His way of doing things came from his own family, passed down like a stubborn strain in the blood, and I only learned that much later. At the time, I had no way to measure it. I had left my parents' house and stepped into his, and I assumed the walls of the world simply looked like this everywhere. When you have no comparison, a cage can feel like the shape of the sky. What made it hard to see was that Daniel was never cruel in a way I could name. He did not raise his voice. He did not raise his hand. He was patient, almost gentle, and that gentleness was its own kind of pressure. When I did something he disliked, he did not scold. He grew quiet, and the quiet spread through the house until I found myself apologizing for things I could not identify. A man who shouts gives you something to push against. A man who only goes silent teaches you to push against yourself. I spent those first weeks learning to read a stillness that never explained itself. I had no way to leave, and I want you to sit with that, because people who have never lived it ask why a woman does not simply go. I had no money of my own. The land was his, the house was his, the horse and buggy were his. My family had spent everything they had, spiritually and otherwise, on making this marriage happen, and going home would have meant handing them back the shame they had paid so dearly to be rid of. I was 20 years old with a stitched marker in a drawer and nowhere on this earth that was mine. Dependence is not weakness. It is a set of doors, and someone else holds the keys. There was one moment early on when I should have understood more than I did. My Aunt Verna came to help me settle the house, and she was a kind woman, quick with her hands and quicker with her tongue about everyone in the district. She named names all afternoon, gossiped cheerfully about weddings and quarrels and who was expecting, but she never once said Anna. When I mentioned my sister, Verna's hands went still over the dish she was drying, and she said only, "We don't need to stir that pot." Then she changed the subject to the weather. I thought she was protecting my feelings. I know now she was protecting something else. That was the first sign, though I did not read it, that Anna's leaving was not a private family sorrow, but a managed silence. Something the women around me had already agreed to hold shut. A sorrow you share, a managed silence you enforce. There's a difference between a family that grieves together and a family that has decided quietly what everyone is allowed to remember. I had walked into the second kind without knowing there was a first, and I had married into the corner of it where the rules were strictest, where a wife's first duty was not to love or to keep house, but to say yes in a way that could never be taken back. So the night Daniel asked his question, I did not yet have any of this understanding. I had only the cold room, the unopened trunk, and a sentence hanging in the lamplight that I could not answer. He was waiting. He was patient, the way he was always patient. And I remember thinking, in the confused way you think when your whole idea of your life is quietly coming apart, that Anna had stood somewhere very like this once, that she had heard something very like this, and that whatever she had done in that moment was the reason my mother would no longer say her name. The question he asked required an answer, and he was in no hurry for it. That was the first thing I learned about how his house worked. Daniel did not demand. He waited, and the waiting did the demanding for him. I sat on the edge of the trunk with my hands in my lap, and instead of saying the words he wanted, I did the thing I had been taught never to do. I asked him what he meant. My voice was small and reasonable. I only wanted to understand what I was agreeing to before I agreed to it. It seemed like the most ordinary request in the world. Something shifted in his face when I asked. Not anger, something closer to disappointment, as though I had failed a test he had assumed I would pass easily, being the agreeable sister. He folded his hands a little tighter and said that a wife did not need to understand every reason, only to trust the man God had given her. He said it gently. He said it the way you might correct a child who has reached for a hot pan, more concerned than annoyed. And that gentleness confused me completely, because everything in me had braced for a storm, and instead I got a soft voice telling me that my question was itself the problem. I did not answer him fully that night. I said something halfway, something that was neither yes nor no, and he let it lie. But I understood that the matter was not closed. It simply moved underground, the way water moves under a field, showing up later where you least expect it. I lay awake in the dark of that new house listening to him breathe, and I kept thinking about Anna, about how she had asked people questions and looked at them too long. For the first time it occurred to me that the very thing our family had called Anna's difficulty might have been the only healthy thing about her. The next morning the marker was gone from the top of my trunk. I had left it there on purpose, wanting one familiar thing in that strange room. When I looked, the surface was bare. I found it later, folded into the back of a drawer with the winter linens, and I could not remember moving it. Daniel had tidied the room while I made breakfast, he said when I asked. He said it lightly, the way you mentioned sweeping a floor, but the marker was the one thing in that house that was mine and not his, and its quiet relocation felt like a sentence I did not yet know how to read. I told myself I was being foolish. A cloth had been moved into a drawer where cloths belonged, that was all. But I noticed that when I put it back on the trunk the next day, it was gone again by evening, and this time nothing was said at all. It became a small, silent argument between us, conducted entirely through the position of a stitched square. Each time I set it out, it disappeared. Each time it disappeared, I understood a little more clearly that in this house, even my grief for my sister was something to be managed and put away where it would not show. On the surface, I complied. I stopped setting the marker out. I made his meals the way he liked them, kept the yes ready on my tongue, and learned the exact temperature of his silences so I could warm them before they spread. But underneath the compliance, a small hard knot had formed, and it did not dissolve. I had asked one honest question and been told the question itself was a fault. That does something to a person. It teaches you that your own wish to understand is dangerous, and once you learn that, you begin to watch yourself the way you would watch an unpredictable animal in your own house. I did not know it then, but my hesitation on that first night had already traveled beyond the two of us. A week or so later, Daniel's mother came by with a basket of preserves, and in the middle of pleasant talk she said, mild as milk, that new brides often had trouble adjusting, that it was natural, that it passed with prayer and time. She said adjusting the way a doctor names an illness, a word that turns a person into a case. I had told no one that I was struggling. I had performed contentment carefully, and yet here was my mother-in-law, arriving with a diagnosis I had never confessed, which meant Daniel had told her. My private hesitation, the halfway answer I gave in a dark room, had been carried out of that room and handed to his mother as a problem to be watched. I stood in my own kitchen holding a jar of her plum preserves and understood something cold and clarifying. Nothing that happened between us was private. My silences had names, my questions had records. Somewhere, in the quiet economy of this family, an account was being kept of whether I would become the wife they needed or the sister who had walked out into the dark. And they had already decided which one I was in danger of being. After that visit, my world began to shrink, and it shrank so gently that for a long while I mistook it for kindness. First it was the letters. Daniel offered to carry my mail to town himself since he went anyway, and it seemed thoughtful. Then it became easier if I gave him anything I wished to send, so he could see it went out properly. Then my mother's replies began arriving already opened, and he explained that the flap had come loose in the buggy. Each step had a reasonable face. Only when I added them together did I see that I no longer had a single line of contact with the outside world that did not pass through his hands first. The visits went the same way. At first, he simply preferred to drive me to my parents' house rather than let me walk. Then the drives became less frequent because the work was heavy, the weather poor, the horse needed. Then it was suggested that too much time at my mother's table was unsettling for a new wife, that I should be building my own home, not running back to the old one. I agreed, because agreeing was what I did. I did not notice the door closing until I reached for it one day and found it had quietly latched. By midwinter, I had not been alone with my mother in 2 months. I blame myself for all of it. This is the part that is hardest to explain to someone who has never lived inside a slow narrowing. I did not think, this man is isolating me. I thought, I am not managing my time well. I thought, I am too attached to my family, too slow to settle, too full of the grief over Anna that everyone agreed I should have set down by now. When you are taught that your own instincts are the problem, every warning your body sends you gets filed as a personal failing. I spent that winter apologizing to a house for the crime of missing my own mother. My mother saw the change, I'm sure of it now. The few times we were together, she looked at me the way you look at a field that isn't coming up right, searching for the cause. Once she took my hand across the table and started to say something, her mouth already open around the first word, and then Daniel came in from the yard, and she closed it. She patted my hand instead and said I looked tired. That marriage was tiring at first. Whatever she had been about to tell me went back down inside her. I have thought about that unspoken sentence more than almost anything else from that year. The first person to say anything I could not dismiss was old Katie Yoder, who lived down the road and kept bees. I had brought her some bread, and while she wrapped honey for me to carry back, she asked how I was settling. I gave the answer I gave everyone, that I was blessed, that Daniel was good to me. Katie did not look up from the honey. She only said, quiet and even, "Your sister said the same thing at first." Then she handed me the jar and wished me well, as if she had remarked on the weather. I walked home holding warm honey and a sentence that would not stop turning over. Your sister said the same thing at first. I turned it every way I could. At first meant there had been an after. It meant Katie had watched Anna give the same bright, empty answer I had just given, and had watched it change into something else. It meant that people in this district had seen a pattern I was only beginning to feel, and had said nothing because saying something was not what women here did. The kindest of them left you a warning shaped like a passing remark and trusted you to be desperate enough someday to pick it up. I picked it up. I carried it the rest of the way home. That was the winter the neighbors began praising how settled I had become. Women at quiltings would tell me I had bloomed into the marriage, that Daniel had chosen well, that my mother must be so relieved. I understood that my quietness was being read as contentment, and that the more thoroughly I disappeared into the picture, the more everyone congratulated the picture. My reputation was growing in exact proportion to how little of me was left, and a good reputation, I was learning, is a heavy thing to spend. The more settled everyone believed me, the more it would cost to say that I was not. Then one afternoon, a neighbor woman returned a shawl of Anna's that she had borrowed the year before, saying only that she thought our family should have it back now. She would not meet my eyes when she handed it over. She left quickly, the way you leave when you have done a thing you are not sure you were permitted to do. I stood in the doorway holding my sister's shawl, and I understood that other people in this district knew exactly why Anna had gone. They had known all along. The only person the truth had been kept from, carefully and deliberately, was the sister they had lined up to take her place. The shawl was still folded over my arm when Daniel came in and saw it, and I watched him decide, in the space of a breath, what to do about the look on my face. He did not ask where it had come from. He asked, in his mild way, whether I had been dwelling again on things that only troubled me. Dwelling was his word for any thought he had not approved. I said I was only tired, the answer my mother had taught me without meaning to. But I think he saw that something had shifted, that a door had opened somewhere in me, and a man like Daniel does not leave a door standing open. He goes and finds someone to help him close it. The someone was his mother. A few days later she came again, not with preserves this time, but with purpose, and she settled at my kitchen table as if she had been asked to, which, I understood, she had. Daniel had gone to her with his concern, framed the way he framed everything as care. He was worried, he told her, that I was troubled in my spirit, that the marriage was not taking root, that I dwelt too much on my sister and too little on my duties. He did not say I was unhappy. He said I was struggling spiritually. In this family, unhappiness was a wife's private business, but a troubled spirit was everyone's to correct. His mother's name was Sarah, and I want to be fair to her because she was not a monster and it would be easy to make her one. She was a woman who had survived this same house, this same family, this same set of unwritten rules for 40 years. She had learned to endure it by believing in it, because believing in a thing you cannot escape is easier than breaking against it every day. When she sat across from me at my own table, she was not being cruel. She was doing the only thing that had ever kept her safe and passing it down to me the way she would pass down a recipe or a remedy. We worked while we talked because in that family, no serious conversation happened with idle hands. She had brought mending, and she set a torn shirt between us and handed me a needle so that even our disagreement would look, to anyone glancing in the window, like two women doing peaceful work. And that was the lesson inside the lesson. Everything painful in this family was to be conducted underneath something ordinary. The mending was not a task. It was a cover. I threaded the needle and understood that I was being taught how to make my own silencing look like domestic peace. She told me gently that my trouble was pride. That was the word she chose, and she said it kindly, the way you name a common ailment. She said a woman who needed to understand everything before she agreed had let pride creep in where trust should be. She said Anna had suffered from the same pride, and look where it had taken her, out into the world, cut off, lost. She did not say lost to hell, but the shape of it was in the room. My honest question, the one thing I had done that felt truly my own, was being renamed as the very sin that had destroyed my sister. I asked her what help there was for me then, if I was so troubled. I asked it sincerely. Some part of me still wanted to be fixed, to be made into the easy daughter again. And here is what I remember most clearly. She promised me comfort. She promised that peace would come if I submitted, that the ache in me would ease once I stopped resisting the order of things. But everything she actually offered was a way to disappear more completely. The comfort was on one side of the table, and the price was on the other. And the price was the last part of myself that still asked questions. What I understood, sitting there stitching a shirt that was not mine, was that these were the same women who left warnings shaped like passing remarks. Katie by her beehives. My mother with her mouth half open across a table. Even Sarah, who was here to correct me, had survived by learning exactly what she was now telling me to accept. They all knew. They had all felt it, and they had all made the same terrible arithmetic that a woman who submits gets to stay, and a woman who asks gets erased. The warnings and the enforcement came from the same mouths. That was the cruelty no one could name, because naming it would implicate everyone. Before she left, Sarah said one thing that finally opened the whole matter to me. She patted my hand the way my mother did and told me not to worry about the question Daniel had asked on our wedding night. She said every wife in their family answered it, that it was simply their way, that once I said the words properly, the trouble in me would pass. She spoke as though I already knew what she meant. And in that moment, I realized the question had not been Daniel's at all. It was older than him. It was a thing this family did to its brides, handed down like the mending, and I had been brought in to say yes to it in my sister's place. I could not stop thinking about the phrase every wife in their family. It meant there were others. It meant that somewhere in this family there was a woman who had stood where I stood, heard what I heard, and stayed. And if she had stayed, she had learned things I needed to know. I began, quietly, to watch the women who came and went from Daniel's parents' house, looking for the one who might have survived long enough to remember. I found her at a workday that spring, a widow named Lena who had married Daniel's uncle decades before and outlived him. She sat apart from the others, watchful, saying little, and something in her stillness was not the same as obedience. Lena had married into this line as a young woman and had spent her whole life inside its rules. She was not a blood relation to me, which mattered because it meant she owed my parents nothing and Daniel nothing she could not afford to withhold. When the other women drifted to the food tables, she stayed at the drying lines with me, and we folded sheets together in the cool air. She did not look at me while she worked. In that family, I was learning. The important things were always said sideways, to your hands or to the middle distance, never to your face, because a face could be reported and hands could not. She did not offer anything at first. She asked how I was finding married life, and I gave my practiced answer. And she let a long silence sit between us before she spoke again. Then she said, still folding, that she had wondered which one of us they would bring in after Anna left. Which one of us? As though I were a piece fitted into a slot that had been standing empty. I asked her what she meant, and she told me, plainly and without drama, that the question Daniel asked me was not his idea and not new. It was a thing the men of this family asked their brides, and had for as long as she had been among them. She told me she had said her own yes 40 years ago, in a cold room not unlike mine, to a man not unlike Daniel. She had not understood it then either. She had spent the decades since learning exactly what she had agreed to, one small surrender at a time, until there was very little left of the girl who had walked in. She said this without self-pity, the way you report the weather of a long-ago winter. What she had lost, she said, was not any single thing you could point to. It was the slow certainty that her own account of her life was true. When your husband corrects your memory often enough, you stop trusting it. I asked her why she was telling me when everyone else only left warnings and walked away. She was quiet for a while, folding, and then she said that she had once tried to warn a young woman plainly years before, and it had gone badly. The girl had repeated it to the wrong person, and Lena had paid for it. And worse, so had her own daughter, who had been taught afterward to see her mother as bitter and untrustworthy. So Lena had learned caution the hard way. She spoke to me now only because I had already begun to ask questions on my own, and a woman who is already asking, she said, is harder to erase. Then she did something the others had not. She reached into her apron, took out the stitched marker, the one I had left in the drawer that morning, the one that kept disappearing, and pressed it into my hand. I had not brought it. I did not know how she had it. She closed my fingers around it and said only that Anna had left it with her the week before she went, and had asked her to make sure it reached the right sister when the right sister was ready to see. Then she picked up another sheet and went on folding, as though she had handed me nothing more than a scrap of cloth. I stood there with the marker in my fist and felt the whole shape of the last year tilt. It was not a keepsake I had happened to bring from home. It had been sent. Anna had put it into Lena's hands deliberately, entrusting it to the one woman in this family who could not be easily silenced, and Lena had waited a full year for me to become the kind of person who would understand what it was. All this time I had thought Anna abandoned me without a word. All this time there had been a word, held in trust, waiting for me to be ready to hear it. That night I sat with the marker under the lamp, turning it in my hands the way Anna and I used to turn it as girls, arguing over the crooked border. The cloth felt heavier than a scrap of cloth should. I ran my thumb along the seam we had sewn together and felt for the first time that the stitching along one edge was thicker than it should be, doubled over and closed where it ought to have lain flat. Something was inside it. My sister had not just left me a memory. She had left me a message sewn shut inside the one thing she trusted me to keep, waiting a year for hands that finally knew to open it. I did not open it that night. I am not proud of that, but I want to be honest. I sat with the thickened seam under my thumb for a long time, and I was afraid, because once I opened it, I could no longer pretend I did not know. A message from Anna would end the story I had been telling myself, the one where she had simply run and left me behind, the one where I was the good daughter making the best of things. I waited 2 more days. Then, on an afternoon when Daniel had driven to town, I took my sewing scissors and carefully picked out the doubled stitches along the edge of the marker. Inside was a strip of paper, folded small and soft with age, covered in Anna's cramped hand. She had written it in the days before she left, in the little time she had, and it was not the letter of a girl fleeing in confusion. It was clear and careful. She wrote that she was leaving because of the question, the one they would make me answer too. She wrote that she had said no to it, and that saying no had made staying impossible, and that she could not warn me openly because our parents had already agreed I would take her place. She wrote that she had tried to tell me, and that her letters had never left the house. I had believed Anna abandoned me. I had believed she was ashamed or selfish or lost to the pride everyone spoke of. The note undid all of it in a few lines. She had not abandoned me. She had tried to reach me and been prevented. My unanswered summer letters, the ones I thought she was too proud to reply to, she had never received them, and hers to me had never been sent. Someone in the house had stood between us the whole time, opening what came in and burning what went out, so that each sister would believe the other had let go first. We had been kept apart on purpose and made to blame each other for it. And then the line that changed everything. Anna wrote that when our father came to Daniel to arrange my marriage, the question was part of it. It was not something Daniel decided to ask me alone in a dark room. It was a term spoken of and agreed to between the men before I ever said a word. My father, Daniel, and the family elders settling in advance that I would give the answer Anna had refused. The wedding night was not the beginning of anything. It was the collection of a debt already promised in my name. I had been sold a role and told it was love. I understood then who all of it had protected. Not me, not even Daniel particularly. It protected the family's standing. Anna's no had torn a hole in the picture the district looked at, and a torn picture invites talk, and talk is the one thing a family like ours could not survive. So they had found the agreeable sister and stitched her into the hole. The question was the stitch. Once I said the words back, out loud, before witnesses, no one need ever fear I would tear the picture again, because I would have publicly agreed to hold it still. My yes was not for Daniel. It was insurance for everyone. That was the true cruelty of it, and it was so much quieter than cruelty is supposed to be. There was no villain twisting a mustache. There was a father protecting his name, a mother too frightened to speak, a husband collecting what he had been promised, a family passing down a rule the way it passed down land. Each of them could tell themselves they had done nothing wrong because each had only done one small, reasonable part. The harm was spread so thin across so many hands that no single hand felt heavy. But it added up to a woman erased, and then, when she left, a second woman fitted in behind her. I looked at the marker differently after that, and I looked at the whole wedding night differently. His calm, that terrible patience I had mistaken for gentleness, I finally understood it. Daniel had not been nervous or hopeful the way a new husband might be. He had been certain. He had asked his question the way you ask about seed or weather, because to him it truly was that settled, that ordinary, a thing already arranged and merely awaiting the formality of my voice. My hesitation had not surprised him because he doubted the answer. It had surprised him because he had been promised the easy sister, and I was, for one honest moment, not being easy. Holding Anna's note, I understood that I was now in more danger than I had been the day before, not less. As long as I had merely hesitated, I could be corrected, prayed over, worn down. But I now held proof of what had been arranged in my sister's own hand, hidden in an object that kept disappearing from my drawer. If they knew I had read it, I would not be a troubled wife to be guided back. I would be a threat to the picture, exactly as Anna had become. I sewed the note back inside the marker with my own thread that night, small and tight, and I began, for the first time, to think not about how to be good, but about how to get out. I did not leave. I want to say that plainly because people always want the woman to leave the moment she knows, and knowing is not the same as being able. I knew in early spring, and I stayed through the summer and into the fall, and every one of those months had a reason. I had no money that was mine. I had no address for Anna, only the certainty that she was somewhere 3 districts distant or farther, and no way to search without Daniel learning of it. Going home meant handing my parents back the shame they had spent everything to bury. Every door I could name was one someone else held shut. So I did what women in that house had always done. I learned to wait, and I made my waiting useful. On the outside, I became more settled than ever. I said my yeses smoothly. I stopped setting the marker on the trunk, stopped mentioning Anna, stopped asking the questions that had marked me. Daniel relaxed by degrees, and his mother told him I was coming along, that the pride was leaving me, that prayer had done its work. Let them believe it. Every ounce of trust I bought back with my performance was an ounce of freedom I might spend later. I was not surrendering. I was saving. The one thing I would not risk losing was the note. I copied it out in my smallest hand onto a second scrap, and I hid the copy separately, so that if the marker were taken from me, the words would still exist somewhere in the world. Then I sewed Anna's original back into its seam and put the marker where it would raise no alarm. Not hidden exactly, but folded in plain sight among the linens, ordinary and overlooked. I had learned that lesson from Sarah's mending. The safest place for a dangerous thing in that house was underneath something too domestic to inspect. But performing contentment costs more than anyone tells you. To smile and agree while knowing what I knew day after day wore a groove in me. I slept badly. I lost the thread of my own days, sometimes catching myself unsure whether a thing had happened or I had dreamed it, and I understood then exactly what Lena had meant about losing the certainty that your own account is true. Daniel's quiet corrections had done to me in a year what 40 years had done to her. I began to keep small private notes of what had actually occurred, dates and words, so that I would have something outside my own failing memory to hold on to. Daniel's patience, meanwhile, was curdling. He had expected the pride to leave me and be done. When my outward calm did not turn into the warm, willing agreement he had been promised, he grew watchful in a new way. He began asking where I had been and how long a task had taken. He noticed the linens had been moved. Once I came into the room to find him standing at the open drawer, the marker in his hand, turning it over as I had turned it, and my heart stopped. He only said the stitching had come loose along one edge and I ought to mend it. I said I would. That night, I moved the copy to a new place. There was a stretch late in the summer when I let myself hope. Daniel came in one evening almost kind and said that if things continued well, he would take me to my parents' home for a visit, alone, the way I had wanted for so long. For a few days, I let the thought warm me. I would see my mother. I might find some thread that led toward Anna. I did the arithmetic of it over and over, and it seemed for the first time in a year that a door might be swinging open on its own. Then he named his condition, and the door was not a door at all. The visit would happen, he said, after I had settled the matter of our wedding night once and for all. He wanted me to say the words, the answer to the question, properly, out loud, and not only to him. He wanted it said before his parents, so the family could put my troubles behind them for good. The visit was the bait. The public yes was the trap. He was offering me my mother in exchange for the last piece of myself, and dressing the exchange as a reward. It was the same collection he had been making since the first night, only now with a price tag I could read. Something in me went still and clear when I understood that. Not angry, not frightened, only certain in a way I had not been about anything in that whole year. I had spent months telling myself that if I were good enough, patient enough, quiet enough, the house would soften and let me keep some corner of myself. Now I saw there was no corner it would let me keep. The price was always going to be all of me, paid a little at a time or all at once, and there was no amount of contentment I could perform that would change it. Whatever I did next, I was done paying by installments. The next time they asked for the words, I already knew I would not give them. The gathering came in October on a mild Sunday when the family met at Daniel's parents' house after service. I understood before I arrived what it was for. Daniel had told me it would be a simple family meal, but the way he said settle things beforehand, the way his mother's eyes moved over me when we came in, told me the meal was only the frame. The picture inside it was to be me, saying my words in front of them all, closing the matter of the difficult bride the way Anna's matter had never been allowed to close. They had arranged an audience for my surrender and called it dinner. We ate first, and the ordinariness of it was its own pressure. Past dishes, talk of the harvest, the children underfoot. I had learned by then that everything in this family was conducted underneath something ordinary, and I felt the real business gathering under the meal like water under a field. When the plates were cleared, Daniel's father folded his hands, and the room quieted the way a room quiets when everyone already knows what is coming. Daniel said gently that I had been troubled since our marriage, and that it would ease all our hearts to hear me affirm before the family my place as his wife. He turned to me. He asked me to say the words. I knew the choice in front of me completely, with none of the fog that had covered the last year. I could say the words. If I said them, the house would warm again. The visit to my mother would be granted. The whole family would exhale, and I would be safe in the way a person is safe who has agreed to disappear. Or I could stay silent and lose all of it, the house, my standing, whatever fragile thread still connected me to my parents, any hope of being the daughter who put things right. Safety on one side, myself on the other. There was no version where I kept both. My mother was there. She had been brought, I think, precisely so that I would feel her there. She sat across the room with her hands knotted in her apron, and when Daniel asked me for the words, she looked at me with a plea so plain it needed no voice. Just say it, her face said. Say it and be safe, the way I did, the way we all did. In that look, I finally understood my mother completely. She was not on their side. She was on the side of survival, and she had learned so long ago that the two were the same thing that she could no longer tell them apart. She was begging me to save myself the only way she knew. The one person in the room who did not plead was Lena. She sat near the window with her hands still, and when the silence stretched and everyone waited for me to break it, she did a small thing. She got up, crossed the room, and came to stand beside my chair. Close, her shoulder nearly touching mine. She said nothing. She did not need to. In a family where everything important was said sideways, standing was a whole sentence. She was telling them, without a word they could report, that I was not alone in the room, and telling me that whatever it cost, some part of the cost would be shared. Daniel felt the room change, and he did the thing he always did when a door stood open. He moved to close it gently. He said in his mild voice that I was clearly unwell, overtired. that no one should hold my silence against me, that we could try again another day when I was more myself. It was a mercy offered so that I would take it and let the moment pass unbroken. A year before, I would have taken it gratefully. But I understood now that his mercy and his control were the same hand, and that every kindness in that house was a way of keeping me from ever finishing a sentence of my own. So I finished one. I stood up next to Lena and I said quietly that I would not say the words. I said that I understood now what the question had truly been and what it had cost my sister, and that Anna had not been proud or lost or sinful. She had been right. I said it plainly in front of all of them, that my sister had been right to leave and that I would not stand in the place they had built for me by keeping her silent. My voice did not shake. It was the first fully honest thing I had said aloud since my wedding night, and it was, at last, an answer to his question. The answer was no. The warmth left the room all at once. The way heat leaves a stove when the fire goes out. No one shouted. That was not their way. My father's face closed like the barn door I remembered from the morning Anna left. Daniel's mother looked at me with something that was not quite anger, more like grief, as though I had broken a thing she had spent 40 years keeping whole. Daniel said nothing at all, which frightened me more than shouting would have. My place in that family had ended in the space of a sentence, quietly, completely. Lena's shoulder stayed against mine, and somewhere under the fear I felt, for the first time in a year, that I could breathe. I need to give you the whole of it now, the question itself, because you have waited the way I made myself wait. On our wedding night, Daniel asked me, "Do you promise never to contradict me in front of anyone, no matter what you see?" That was all. No matter what you see. It sounded, in that lamplit room, almost like a request for peace, a wish that his wife not shame him publicly. That is why it took me so long to feel the weight of it. But a promise never to contradict a man no matter what you see is not a promise about manners. It is a promise to make yourself unable to accuse him of anything, ever, before it happens. That was the true purpose, and it took Anna's note and a year of my own to see it clearly. The question was not about pride or submission, though they dressed it in those words. It was insurance, secured in advance. If a wife has vowed before witnesses never to contradict her husband no matter what she sees, then whatever she later sees is already answered for. Her testimony is spent before she can give it. Anna had understood this instantly, the way you understand a trap the moment your foot touches it, and she had refused to put her name to her own silencing. I had needed a year and my sister's smuggled words to understand what she grasped in a single night, and the family knew. That was the part I had to sit with longest. My father knew because he had agreed to the question as a term of the marriage when he arranged it. The elders who blessed the match knew. Daniel's mother knew because she had said her own version of it 40 years before and enforced it on me over mending. My own mother knew enough to be afraid and chose fear over warning me. The only two people the truth was ever fully kept from were the two sisters it was used against. And we were kept apart precisely so that neither of us could tell the other what we had learned. I would like to tell you there was justice, there was not the kind that satisfies. No one confessed. No one stood before the district and admitted what had been done. Daniel kept his land, his clean barn, his place near the front at service. Within a season, the talk had reshaped itself around him kindly. Poor Daniel, twice unlucky with difficult sisters, when the fault so plainly lay in the family that had raised us, he remarried in time. I do not know what he asked her. I try not to think about it because there is nothing I can do about it, and that helplessness is its own quiet grief. What happened to me was quieter than shunning and slower than exile. I was not formally cast out. I was simply let go of, one relationship at a time, the way I had once been isolated a door at a time, the process run in reverse. Invitations stopped. Eyes slid past me at market. My parents did not forbid me their house, but they made it clear that my presence reopened a wound they wished closed, and after a while I stopped going. I lost the family I had spent a year trying to save by disappearing into it. The cost of refusing to vanish was, in the end, being made to vanish anyway, only on my own terms this time. But I was not alone in it. Lena took me in first, into the small house she had earned by outliving the man who once asked her the question, and it was Lena who helped me find Anna. My sister was living and working in a distant settlement, quietly, carefully, the way you live when you have gotten out and do not intend to be pulled back. When we finally sat across a table from each other, both of us older and warier than the girls who had fought over a crooked border, we did not speak for a long time. Then I put the marker on the table between us. The seam opened, her note lying flat, and she began, at last, to cry. Anna told me the rest that Lena could not. She told me how she had said no on her own wedding night and been given a week to reconsider, and how she had used that week to write to me and watch every letter fail to leave the house. She told me she had left the marker with Lena as a last hope, sewing the truth inside it, trusting that even if she could not reach me in time, someday I would grow into the kind of person who would open the seam. She had not abandoned me. She had left me the only thing she could, a message and a witness, and a year for me to become ready for both. The marker hangs in my house now, in the front room where I see it every morning. The seam's still open so that anyone who looks closely can see there was something hidden inside it once. I kept it that way on purpose. For a year it kept disappearing into a drawer, moved by a hand that wanted my grief and my sister put quietly away. Now it hangs in the light, unhidden in a house that is mine, and no one moves it. It is a small square of cloth with 2 girls' initials and a border we could never get straight. It is also the only honest record of what was done to us, and I will not sew it shut again. Part 11. I live near Anna now, close enough to walk. We are not the girls we were, and we do not pretend to be. We have both had to build lives outside the only world we were raised to want, and that building is slow, unglamorous work, learning to earn, to bank, to sign our own names to things, to trust our own memory of what happened without a husband or a mother there to correct it. Some days it is lonely in a way the old house never was, because the old house was crowded with people who all agreed. But it is mine. Every quiet room in it is mine, and no one asks me to promise anything before I understand it. What I reclaimed is smaller than escape and larger than it, both at once. I did not reclaim my family. Most of them I lost. I did not reclaim my standing in the district. That is gone and will not return. What I got back was the right to finish my own sentences, the right to hear a question and ask what it means before I answer. That single thing, the thing that got me named as troubled and prideful and difficult, turned out to be the whole of me worth saving. Anna knew that at once. It took me a year and a stitched shut note, but I know it now, and I will not unlearn it. Not everything mended. I want to be honest about that, because I think the honest version is the only one worth telling. My parents and I are careful strangers now. My mother has never said she was sorry, and I have stopped waiting for it, because I understand at last that her silence was the same fear that shaped my whole girlhood, and that she does not have another language. Daniel was never held to account for anything. There was no reckoning, no confession, no moment where the district saw plainly what had been done. The world did not rearrange itself to match the truth. I simply carry the truth now, out in the open, which is more than I could once do. I think often about the trunk. On my wedding night, it sat unopened by the bed, packed with the things I had brought from my old life, and I remember staring at its closed lid while Daniel asked his question, too afraid to unpack it, as if leaving it shut might keep some part of me from fully arriving in that house. I unpacked that trunk at last in Anna's spare room more than a year after I first carried it in. I took each thing out slowly on a floor that no one else owned, and I understood that I had finally arrived somewhere I could stay. Here is what I have come to believe, and it is the only lesson I will offer because I distrust stories that hand you too many. A promise you are made to give before you understand it is not a promise at all. It is a fence, built in advance, around whatever you might someday see or say. The words sound gentle. Do not contradict me. Keep the peace. Trust and do not ask. But a vow of silence collected before the wrong has even happened is not about peace. It is about making sure that when the wrong comes, you have already agreed not to name it. I do not think this belongs only to families like the one I left, though it wore the particular clothes of that world. The setting may be unfamiliar to you, the buggies, the prayer caps, the district, and its careful talk, but the shape of it may not be. Some of you have been handed a question dressed as devotion or duty or love and felt the trap inside it before you had a word for the feeling. Your house may have looked nothing like mine. The pressure to answer before you understood, to say yes and be safe, may be something you recognize all the same. So this is what I want to leave with you, and it is not a speech about freedom, because freedom came to me poor and late and lonely, and I will not sell it to you as a bright thing. It is only a question to turn the tables on the one that was asked of me. What have you been pressed to promise before you were allowed to understand it? I would truly like to know, not the private wound, only the shape of it, if you care to say, down in the comments, because I read them and because I think naming these things out loud is the one thing our silence was built to prevent. If stories that sit in the quiet, difficult corners of closed worlds are ones you want more of, stay with me and subscribe, and I will keep telling them as honestly as I can. But before you go, do one thing for me. My sister asked her question on her wedding night and paid for the answer, and I asked mine a year too late. So ask yours now, while it is still early. Not the question a man puts to you in a lamplit room, but the one you put to yourself. What am I about to agree to, and have I been allowed to understand it? Ask it out loud. Then wait for your own answer before you give anyone else theirs.